Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. David Kelly here from the Great World Race podcast. Today we have a gentleman with us. Adventure is his middle name. Western States 100, Leadville 100, Badwater 135, Martin the Stables, Comrades Marathon, the most difficult cycling race in the world, which is the race across America, trek to both the North and South Pole. He's done them all. This is also backed up with him building up a successful catering business that supplies over 600 flights daily. This all from a single restaurant business out of Ronald Reagan Airport. Frank Fumich, you're extremely welcome to the Great World Race podcast. How are you?
Hey, David. Thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure, Frank. How are you? How's everything in DC?
I'm a little bit tired just hearing that bio.
Yeah, hey, Frank, I was only getting started there as well.
I'm glad
Frank.
Those things are behind me.
yeah, no, that's the most impressive part of it, Frank. There's about another 10 of them that I could mention there.
Thanks, man.
It's great to have you on, Frank. So, Frank, we'll get into it there, Frank. I know you've done a huge amount of adventure stuff, and you're based in DC now. You went to the University of West Virginia. Was it in college or high school your adventure career started, or your sporting career? Or if you could just give us some background on that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was always pretty athletic growing up, but certainly never good enough in anything to take it past the high school level. I was just a recreational athlete, but I actually didn't start running until I was 30 years old. I ran my first ever race at 30, which was the Marine Corps Marathon. And that's really how it all started.
So obviously Marine Corps Marathon, I was there last year, a great event. Actually, I had a great time there at the expo. The weather was unbelievable. So Frank, how do you go from like running a marathon? You moved on. My understanding, you've climbed 5 or 6 of the highest of the 7 peaks. You know, how do you go from there onto the adventure, the road you went down to? Like, does it start off with just some trekking? Is it a bet, or what happens?
Well, actually, it was a bet to. I started the Marine Corps Marathon. I dedicated to an aunt that had a brain tumor. That's really how it started. But when I first started training for that, a friend bet me, I couldn't run 10 miles. And of course I did, and then went on from there. But once I finished the marathon, honestly, I didn't even know that this whole world existed. I didn't know that ultras existed. And so I was just fascinated that I was able to run a marathon, and that, it was super hard for me. I think I did it. My first time was 350. But I had just trained for like 2.5 months. So, I basically dropped and was carried off on a stretcher literally by the Marines. And then, once I sort of came around, I was just fascinated that the body's, it wants to quit, but the mind makes you keep going. And so then eventually, I got on the internet and I learned of Ironmans. And so my first ever triathlon was an Ironman. And then I just kind of wanted to see what I was capable of, and just kept upping the ante. And then signed up. I climbed Mount Rainier, and then the whole 7 summits started. So it was just, trying to outdo the last thing to see if I was able to do it.
No, very, very, very impressive resume. And my understanding is you're heading off to Papua New Guinea as well in October before the Great World Race to hit. There's a bit of I know you said there's a bit of a debate over, I think it's the Australian or the Australasian, the Oceania peak.
Yeah, exactly. I guess for most people that are super serious about doing the 7 summits, they'll just do 8 to leave no doubt. And the Australian one is more of just a walk up. But I did do Costa Kazi in Australia. It's a 150-mile race from the coast to the top of Kosciuszko to give it a little more street cred as opposed to just walking up for a few hours. But Carstensz Pyramid has been closed for a few years now due to some political strife. And, we originally had a conflict of time until you just changed the date. And I was going to have to pick Carstensz Pyramid because there's no telling it might close again. But fortunately, it all worked out great, and I'll be able to do that and your race. So I'm super excited.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you on board as well. You're a great character. I had the pleasure meeting you in DC there a couple of weeks ago. So it's great to have you on board. So Frank, obviously the DC Marathon, how do you transition into, say, what was your first mountain that you climbed? Because obviously marathons are extremely difficult to do. However, you're going up mountains where there's obviously bigger cost if anything goes wrong. How do you actually go from there, from, starting a bet you can't run 10 mile, run the marathon, to actually start climbing a mountain? Do you just start trekking smaller mountains, or How does that end up?
Well, I'm not your average person that takes baby steps. Even in a marathon, lots of people want to run one marathon and they think, oh, I don't have the time. I have a full-time job. I have a family. But you really don't need that much time to train. I mean, I'm not saying people should just go run out and potentially injure themselves, but everybody has it in them to run a marathon without a ton of training. And so, I just signed up to climb Mount Rainier in Washington State, which is a pretty formidable mountain. Even though it's only 2 days, it's got like legitimate glaciers and is a danger factor. So, but even that, you show up with zero mountaineering experience and they give you like a half-day course to self-arrest and crampon work and rope work. And then you head up Rainier. And I remember going, stepping over crevasses thinking to myself, I have no business being on here, even though they passed us to do it. So once I did that, then I read the book, Dick Bass's book on the 7 summits. And then that got the head spinning. So then I signed up. I did them in the proper order to get experience as I went. I certainly would never sign up for Denali or Everest as my first mountain climb. I did the easiest and stepped my way up. And my most recent one was Denali. And it took 2 attempts because the first one, the weather was awful when we timed out. But yeah, so in the mountains, when your life is on the line, potentially, I have not jumped into it. I've worked my way up slowly.
Okay, so there's no bets there.
Yeah.
There's too much at risk. No, that's understandable. And I know we had a quick conversation the last couple of days. Out of all the peaks you've done, Denali was the most difficult. Is that correct?
Most definitely. Yeah. I mean, you're basically, when you climb Mount Everest, which is probably more difficult, but I do know people that have done both. And I'm very interested to ask them, hey, how do you compare? And while Everest, you're gone for longer and you're higher, you do have probably bottled oxygen if you choose to use it. Or on Denali, I mean, you're the Sherpa. You don't have anybody carrying your stuff. You're carrying like a 75-pound pack and you're pulling the 75-pound sled. And it's pretty brutal. So, and there are some dangers, especially when the weather turns. So I feel like it's a good step towards Everest would be next after Papua New Guinea, of course.
Yeah, and you found it, you said as well, it was actually colder than Mount Vincent down in Antarctica, which was obviously difficult for, I'd say, some people to believe, that understand. Yeah,
I mean, actually, Mount Vincent, the air temperature might have been a little bit colder on Vincent, but it was a beautiful sunny day, and I was up there. I think I took my gloves off okay. Denali was a total whiteout, and we didn't see anything, and it was pretty sketchy and a little scary. So, yeah, the weather plays a huge role in any mountain climb.
Yeah, no, it's understandable. And as I said, I've talked to you. We've been over and back on mails the last couple of months. We've had a couple of calls. I've met you in person. And in fairness, you're not one to complain or talk about difficulties. However, can you bring us through RAAM?
As soon as you said that, I knew what you were going to ask. RAAM is the hardest thing, by far the hardest thing I've ever done. And I've done a lot of stuff. I can't imagine anything honestly being harder than RAAM. Even like the Barclays Marathon, which is probably the hardest foot race on the planet. It's totally insane. And I would have no chance of finishing it because I'm not skilled enough. But RAAM is 12 days for me. And you're biking 20 plus hours a day. And you're not just spinning your wheels casually. You're putting power into the pedals for 20 plus hours a day through the desert, over the Rocky Mountains, through the windy plains, and then even up across the Appalachians that are super steep. The sleep deprivation alone made me totally lose my mind. There were moments where I would wake up from a nap, and this is hard to believe unless you've been up for like multiple days and know what sleep deprivation does. Not only did I not know where I was, but I would wake up and in the first 30 minutes, I didn't know who I was. I had amnesia. And my team literally put a note on my bike that said, I am Frank Fumich, and I am racing a race across America. And I would literally wake up, and they would just be, get on your bike and go that way. And as I was pedaling, I would read this and come to and be like, oh, my God, I'm Frank, and I'm biking across America. Yeah, it was awful.
Yeah, because it's funny. I've heard of it. Like, I would have known a lot of the running adventure races over the years. I hadn't heard of RAAM until a couple of months ago. But yeah, I've heard nothing but bad things. Obviously, it's good to finish these things, but I've heard nothing but bad things about it. Just to give people a bit of insight into it, Frank. Where do you start with RAAM? And you have to. Okay, it's a cycle race. It's across the US. You have to complete it within 12 days. It's all self-supporting. And could you just give people a bit of an insight into that, like how you have to take care of yourself along the way? And
well, I mean, it's not you're self-supported by your team, so you are supported by a team. You have to rent a massive RV. I had like 10 guys, and then you have a chase vehicle. The RV sort of leapfrogs ahead, but the chase vehicle, for instance, at night stays behind you the whole time. You start in Oceanside, California, and you finish in Annapolis, Maryland, up until this year, and now they're finishing in Atlantic City or somewhere in New Jersey, which was the traditional thing. But yeah, 3,000 plus miles across the country in all kinds of weather. At the desert, it was like 115. And I had like one of the rainiest years ever. It rained in 11 of the 12 states I was in. And I can remember like sideways rain that I was pedaling in all night long. I mean, honestly, I was just soaked to the core where I would just pee right in my shorts as I was biking, because there was literally no reason to even stop because I was soaking wet. And yeah, I mean, just miserable. It was awful.
And do you get to see any of the other competitors along the way, or is it obviously it's so spread out that I'm presuming it's obviously welcome but rare that you get to see other people that are doing the event?
Yeah, not all the time, but you definitely see competitors. I mean, just by chance, there was a woman friend of mine, actually tragically, who's since passed to cancer.
Oh, sorry.
And we strangely would go back and forth quite a bit. But then there's also relay races where there's like 2, 4, 6 plus men and women teams, and they start later, but they usually end up passing the solo people. So, when you just get, when you're doing solo and you're exhausted and you see these fresh people just cranking by you, I mean, it's nice to see them, but, it's a little bit mentally crushing to see how slow you're going, when they pass you. But it's always nice to see some other people out there in some capacity. It's a very lonely experience, especially at night when there's nobody around. It's pitch dark and you're just, you're so exhausted and sleep deprived, and you're just pedaling by yourself, basically.
And it's basically it's 20 hours cycling for 12 days. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, for me, that needs every minute of it. I mean, I actually finished over the 12-hour mark, but because of the weather and we got lost and our radio didn't work and we were rerouted, we didn't get the messages, and I was like pedaling in a flooded town. So I appealed and they gave me an official finish. But yeah, I needed every minute plus minutes for the 12 days. And actually towards the end, I was behind. So I was biking 24 hours straight and then sleep in a couple hours and then biking another 24. So to try to make up time. So yeah, there were days when I was pedaling over 24 hours on the stretch.
So great looking back, Frank. You won't be signing up again, I assume.
No. Now that I've got an official finish, no, I've literally been on, that was like 5 or 6 years ago. I've been on my bike maybe 5 times since then. I mean, I wasn't a cyclist to begin with, which was crazy to even be, that I did it. But no, I just really don't enjoy it. Now I'm scarred, so I'm not going to sign up for anything close to that.
Yeah, no, it's actually pretty interesting. That actually brings me on to my next question. Like, I know you do a lot of climbing, running. I even seen you've done an adventure with a 31-mile paddleboard event as well. Is it the Chattajack?
Yes.
Do you generally, like, is running your main sport, or do you kind of, like, generally you train across all sports and then when you have a goal, you focus on that for the couple of months running up to it?
Well, running is definitely my main sport. But when I got sort of, when I did Badwater, I think that was before I even knew of Barclays. And Badwater was always considered the hardest race on the planet, which is totally subjective. And it all depends on what your strengths and weaknesses are. But once I did that,
unless you do RAAM.
Yeah, right. Well, then I just learned of RAAM. Okay, well, I've done the hardest running race on the planet. What's the hardest cycling race? And then what's the hardest paddling race? And so then I thought, well, I'd like to do the hardest event in every discipline, basically. And I did an Ironman. Then I ended up doing a triple a quintuple, and a deca Ironman, which is like a 24-mile swim, 1,120-mile bike, and then a 262-mile run. And so, and actually the Chattajack is tough, but I did the Molokai to Oahu, which is like the most famous paddle race in the world. And I think I fudged my entry, if I'm being totally honest, because there were no races around here. And I think I did a 10-miler, but it wasn't even included on their list. But somehow they let me in anyway. And I went to Hawaii, and I saw like Rob Machado and Chuck Patterson are famous surfers and paddlers. Yeah. And I told them I was from DC, and they're like, huh? And I had never done a downwinder paddle in my life. I mean, they just like thought I was a total lunatic. I was on a borrowed board that I had never been on, and I still managed to paddle 32 miles from Molokai to Oahu, beat the cutoff by like 20 minutes, and I finished second to last. And I had I was almost blind because I forgot my sunglasses, and, you know, the light reflecting off the water. Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy stuff, man.
Great stories, though, Frank. Great stories. So bring us on, Frank. As I said, they're fueling for events. Does that differ? Like, does it differ when you're running marathons, when you're cycling, like when you're going up mountains? Or is it very much just calories in? Well,
it's pretty similar. I mean, you got to get your fuel in. I mean, it's easy enough on a run and on a bike because you can carry it with you. I mean, the mountain climb's probably the most important because, you know, you could potentially die and it's freezing. So you got to keep your water warm enough and make sure you have your electrolytes. And like, for instance, gels that I would take in a run and bike, they freeze. So now I'll take like the gummies that don't freeze. But I mean, generally speaking, you're burning calories and you got to get them in you. So, you know, it's all super important.
Okay, no, it's great, Jack, because it's funny. I had a podcast with Ryan Hall, and he was saying he had done the 777 before, but it was the time he was weightlifting, and he said at the very start, he said he remembers the first marathon in Antarctica, he was just eating protein bars. He said 20 mile in, he said he just wanted sugar. He said the protein bars just went out the window. He said it was just cookies, jellies, whatever sugar-wise he could get in. That's all he wanted.
Yeah,
for the rest
I
of the
mean,
event.
Sugar is awesome. If I'm feeling, you know, recently I guided my blind friend in 2 marathons in 2 days, which was not that difficult, but it was Arkansas and Louisiana. It was super humid, and so I wasn't used to the humidity. And they had Coke there, and God, just guzzling some Coke to get that sugar was like saving our lives. So yeah, those sugar fixes are important.
And I understand your daughter is planning on doing a marathon this year as well.
Yes, she is. So she did the DC Rock and Roll Half Marathon, and it turned out she was the youngest female in the race. We had no idea, and a local reporter reached out to us, and they did a little piece on the news. And so she signed up for the Marine Corps, and it'll be incredibly special because, you know, there was a conflict between the Marine Corps Marathon and your first scheduled race, and I didn't think I was going to be able to do it. So that was my first marathon. It was my 100th marathon, and this year will be maybe my 15th, and it could potentially be my daughter's first marathon at 14. So, I mean, I get goosebumps just thinking about it. It's going to be super special. And this is 100% her. Like, I'm not one of those crazy dads or parents that pushes their kids, even because I do this stuff. It's 100% up to her. I mean, matter of fact, my wife is like, she's not doing that. And I'm like, if she wants to do it, she can do it. So, yeah, it's totally her that wants to do it.
And you've twins. It's only one daughter that's interested in running?
What's that?
You have twin girls?
Yeah.
Only one of them, or both? Do both of them run? Or
one. The other one, no way. She runs a 5K. She's going to walk half of it. She's into tennis, has her own interests, but running is not one of them. And I don't push her.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely brilliant. And Frank, I mentioned at the intro as well, obviously, people talking to you about all the stuff you've done, you think you're full-time adventurer, but that is not the case at all. And you set up, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, you had a single restaurant, Ronald Reagan Airport. You ended up setting up a catering company that provides catering to over 600 flights a day, 160 staff, and you literally supply one of the large airlines across the DC, Virginia area. Is that correct?
Well, yeah. American Airlines is the biggest airline in the world, actually. But yeah, I cater out of there are 3 hubs: DC, Charlotte, and Philadelphia. And yeah, my brother, it was really his restaurant. I was in college. I owned like a small piece of it. I'm not even sure legally, on paper. I thought I did. And so I worked there, managed it. I really didn't know what I wanted to do after college, so I managed our hot dog stand. It was like a food court in the terminal at Reagan here, at Reagan National Airport. And I got a part-time job with the airline, just chucking bags, we call it, a ramper, just so I could fly for free as a young kid. And then while doing that, I saw the need that I could do a much better job at providing the catering than they were doing. So I put a proposal together, ended up getting the contract, and crazy long story. But yeah, 24 years later, I've got 100 plus employees and dozens of trucks, and I cater about 600 flights a day. And I just got a new contract, actually, so I'm picking up more business. So yeah, it's a lot of work. It's had ups and downs. I had 9/11 that almost put me out of business. And then the airline, US Airways, it used to be, went bankrupt twice on me. Then we had 2 mergers. Then it became American. And then we had a pandemic. I mean, who would ever plan for a pandemic in a business where in one day my business went off 80%? So it's just like running and any of this stuff. You hit a wall. And you got to keep going and adapt and never give up. And so that same philosophy, I'm not sure if my work philosophy bled onto my adventure philosophy or if the adventure and ultra running philosophy bled onto my business. But whichever one it was, I could have quit. I could have folded my business after 9/11. I probably could have folded it during any of these bankruptcies when the airline didn't pay me. I could have folded after COVID probably, but even during COVID, we created new revenue streams to make up for the business, and they have remained now that the business is back and more. So, business is best now as it's ever been. But yeah, a lot going on.
Definitely no one can say that they're too busy to run and exercise when they hear that story with you, with all the employees and all the planes you're taking care of every day.
A funny story, David, real quick. I was running a Marine Corps marathon one year, and they had crazy weather coming in, and I literally had to book hotel rooms for my Philly employees so they could spend the night near the airport and not call in. So I'm running and booking hotel rooms. And on my first attempt at RAAM, I DNF'd. My ice machine broke in June, and I had to buy like a $40,000 ice machine on my phone in some state. And I got home and I didn't remember. Honest to God, I did have any memory that my manager was like, "Yeah, you bought the machine." And I was like, what? So, yeah, sometimes I have to do both at the same time.
So the moral of that story is, Frank, if anyone wants to sell anything to you, is to ring you when you're in the middle of a race. Buy anything. So
I'll just give you my credit card.
It's a very good plan. People will do great business out of it. It's no, that's absolutely fantastic. I didn't actually realize that you were working the hot dog stand as well. And I actually didn't. I actually thought it was your restaurant, not your brother's. But it's great, Jan. Your brother said you had a share once. He was trying to get you to work 70, 80-hour weeks.
Yeah, exactly. I fell for it.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Frank. So, Frank, obviously, you're doing the Great World Race in November. You're obviously going to be fit going off the mountain. Like, preparation for that, like, do you think that will change, from any other race you did? Or how do you see the preparation going for that?
Well, running, but more of running. I'll do... In a couple of weeks, I'm guiding my blind friend Aaron Hale in 3 marathons in 3 states in 3 days. Instead of just training for a marathon, you do one long run. I'll do multiple long runs in a row. But I'll also be in great shape from climbing. Hopefully I'll be in all around great shape. But if anyone who's never done multiple marathons or multiple long runs in consecutive days, you just have to get your body used to, when you wake up sore and normally you take a day off, well, you don't take a day off. You go out and run another 15-miler, that type of thing. So it's just lots of running, but, cross training, but that'll come naturally to me since I'll be also in mountain climbing shape.
And Frank, do you mainly train on your own, or is there a group in DC you train with?
No, I've always almost entirely trained by myself. It's good mental training because it's no fun and it's mentally miserable. But when you do that on your own, but then you go to a race and you see people or you have teammates, it makes it that much easier. So no, I just train solo.
No, and you're good buddies with Mike Wardian there in DC, a good friend of my own, Mike.
Yeah. I mean, Mike's like freak of nature and like a couple universes above me. I mean, I can't even like wrap my mind around the stuff he does. But yeah, we've done lots of the same events, believe it or not. But I'm like the last one to finish, and he's like the first one to finish.
Frank, when you're at the party afterwards, as long as you finish, that's the main thing.
There you go. The beer tastes just the same. It's just as cold as long as they put it in the fridge for when I come across.
Absolutely, Frank. Absolutely. Well, listen, Frank, it was absolutely fantastic to catch up with you. It's great to have you on board. And, it's an absolute pleasure. And I think you're an inspiration to anyone from actually a sporting point of view and also a business point of view that you can mix both and still be positive and look fresh on screen.
I appreciate it, David. I'm so psyched for the trip and the races. I can't wait to join you.
Thanks very much, Frank. Listen, it's great speaking to you, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, buddy. Take care. Thanks again.